You can support me by turning on notifications, subscribing to my channel, and liking the video. Waiting for your comments. Twilight Curse in the Whispering Village. How one rural clan inherited an ancient malediction's unholy burden in the remote valleys of an ancient land where the mists cling to the hills like lingering memories and the wind carries echoes of old secrets. There lies a village known only to a few as Whispering Hollow. By day, its thatched cottages and narrow cobblestone lanes might appear as any other rustic settlement, modest and unassuming. But as twilight descends, a pervasive chill and a strange hush settle over the community, a silence punctuated by hushed voices that seem to murmur in the wind. It is here that the rural clan of the Ardent family has dwelled for generations, burdened by a curse so old and insidious that its origins are lost in the swirling mists of time. This is the story of how one clan inherited an ancient malediction, a curse that would shape their fate, twist their fortunes, and forever mark them as bearers of an unholy burden. The legend begins in an era shrouded in myth, when the boundary between the natural and the supernatural was as thin as a spider's thread. According to the oldest tales passed down by firelight, a wandering sorcerer arrived in the region centuries ago. Cloaked in dark robes and bearing eyes that burned like embers, he was a figure of both dread and awe. Desperate for refuge from an enraged kingdom, the sorcerer sought asylum among a humble band of villagers. In return for their shelter, he promised to impart them with ancient wisdom and magical protection. But as is often the case with pacts forged in desperation, the bargain carried unforeseen consequences. When a rival chieftain, blinded by greed and fear, betrayed the villagers by setting fire to their homes, the sorcerer's wrath was unleashed. In a final act of furious vengeance, he cast a potent curse upon the entire clan, declaring that from that day forth they would be haunted by misfortune and despair, a legacy of suffering that would echo through the ages. With his parting words lost in the howl of the wind, the sorcerer vanished into the darkened forest, leaving behind an ominous omen that would come to be known as the Twilight Curse. Over the centuries, the curse became woven into the fabric of life in Whispering Hollow. Generations of the Ardent family bore witness to inexplicable tragedies, a bountiful harvest turned to ruin overnight, inexplicable illnesses that no healer could cure, and the sudden disappearance of beloved children on moonless nights. Every so often, a surviving elder would speak in trembling tones of the whispering that could be heard on the winds at dusk, a soft, mournful chant that seemed to call the cursed souls to join the ranks of the lost. Though skeptics dismissed such accounts as mere superstition, the people of the village knew too well that their fate was sealed by an ancient malediction. In more recent times, the curse's legacy became impossible to ignore. During a bitter winter nearly a decade ago, a mysterious fire consumed the main barn of the Ardent homestead. The barn, which had stood for over 100 years and was once a symbol of the clan's prosperity, burned with a crimson intensity that seemed almost otherworldly. In the aftermath, when the ashes had cooled, villagers found strange symbols charred into the stone foundation, symbols that resembled the sigils described in the old sorcerer's legend. That night, the wind carried a sound that no one could explain, a low, sorrowful wail echoing through the valley, as if mourning the loss of what once was a proud lineage. Determined to break the cycle of despair, the current head of the Ardent clan, a stoic man named Elias, convened a secret family meeting in the depths of the village's ancient chapel. There, beneath vaulted ceilings adorned with faded murals of angels and demons, Elias recounted the lore of the Twilight Curse to his kin. His voice, heavy with grief and determination, described the day the curse was first spoken, how the sorcerer's eyes had burned with an unholy light, and his voice had been like thunder. Elias insisted that the only hope of salvation lay in uncovering the true nature of the curse and performing a ritual of absolution, a ceremony lost to time but hinted at in a crumbling manuscript hidden away in the family crypt. The manuscript, written in archaic symbols and brittle ink, spoke of a covenant of night and shadow and warned that the curse could only be undone by a sacrifice of something most dear. But what that sacrifice might be remained a mystery, and many whispered that the cost would be so steep as to destroy the very essence of the Ardent name. As autumn descended upon Whispering Hollow, painting the forests with hues of dying gold and rust, Elias set out on a quest. Guided by the fading words of the manuscript and the cryptic tales of the village elders, he retraced the footsteps of his ancestors. His journey took him deep into the heart of the ancient woods that bordered the village, a forest where the trees twisted into gnarled shapes and the air pulsed with the quiet heartbeat of forgotten times. It was said that in a hidden glen, at the precise moment when twilight merged into night, one could witness the spectral figure of the sorcerer himself, a silent sentinel who would appear to those brave enough to seek redemption. One particularly chilling evening, as the sun sank below the horizon in a blaze of blood-red splendor, Elias reached the glen. The forest was unnervingly silent, save for the crunch of fallen leaves beneath his boots. A dense fog began to roll in, thick and impenetrable, and the temperature dropped precipitously. He lit a lantern, its feeble glow barely piercing the swirling mist. Then, as if summoned by the incantations he had learned from the manuscript, a figure emerged from the gloom. Draped in a cloak of midnight, with eyes that flickered like dying coals, the sorcerer's specter materialized before him. Elias' heart pounded, yet he bowed in respect. The figure's voice, a low murmur carried by the wind, intoned, "The covenant has been broken by your bloodline's despair. To lift the curse, you must offer what you hold most sacred." With that, the apparition vanished into the mist as silently as it had appeared, leaving Elias trembling with the weight of destiny. Returning to the village, Elias gathered his family and disclosed his encounter. The revelation ignited a fervor among the Ardents. Some were willing to risk everything for freedom from the curse, while others trembled at the thought of a sacrifice too terrible to bear. That night, as the villagers gathered in a clandestine circle at the edge of Whispering Hollow, the atmosphere was electric with both dread and hope. Candles were lit, casting wavering shadows on the ancient stone, and the elders recited old chants passed down through generations. In the midst of this solemn assembly, Elias revealed his plan. He would confront the curse by sacrificing the last remaining heirloom of the cursed lineage, a silver locket said to contain the portrait of the sorcerer's lost love, the very source of his wrath. The locket, weathered and etched with strange symbols, had been kept hidden in the family crypt ever since it was first discovered by a curious ancestor. Its significance was profound. It symbolized both the beginning of the malediction and perhaps the only hope of redemption. As the full moon ascended in a sky as clear as polished obsidian, the ritual commenced. In the center of the village square, a place where the ancient stones still bore carvings of forgotten gods, Elias, flanked by the family's elders, held aloft the silver locket. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a mournful tune that seemed to harmonize with the chants. At that moment, the skies darkened, and a sudden, inexplicable stillness enveloped the land. Every eye in the circle was fixed on Elias as he spoke the incantation, his voice echoing with a mix of determination and despair. The locket glowed faintly, pulsing with a spectral light, and for a heartbeat, it felt as if the entire world held its breath. Then, in a burst of otherworldly radiance, the locket shattered, sending silver shards scattering into the night. A sound like 1,000 whispered apologies filled the air, and the oppressive weight that had long haunted Whispering Hollow began to lift. The villagers, though shaken to their core, felt a collective release, a gentle unraveling of the curse that had bound them for so long. In that transformative moment, the ancient malediction was undone, not through violence or bloodshed, but through the act of relinquishing a symbol of sorrow and loss. In the days that followed, the once ominous mists began to recede, and the land seemed to breathe anew. Crops flourished where once barren fields lay, and the eerie silence of the village was replaced by the tentative murmur of hopeful voices. Yet, even as life returned to Whispering Hollow, the tale of the Twilight curse endured, a somber reminder of the delicate balance between past and present, between grief and hope. The story spread beyond the village, stirring both skepticism and wonder. Travelers came seeking the ruins of the ancient glen, and scholars debated whether curses could truly linger through the ages. In hushed tones, the villagers recalled the night when shadows parted and the curse was broken, a night marked by both unthinkable tragedy and the possibility of redemption. For Elias and his descendants, the burden of the past had been lifted, but the legacy of that dark covenant remained etched in their hearts, a cautionary tale about the cost of despair and the power of ancient oaths. It taught them that even in the midst of sorrow, there can be a spark of hope, and that sometimes the most unholy burdens can be set free through sacrifice and understanding. And though the silver shards of the locket were scattered to the winds, they served as a lasting symbol of a time when the very fabric of the world seemed to tremble under a cursed twilight. Whispers of an empire lost, the unending trail of shadows, and countless other legends have all tried to explain the inexplicable, to give form to the formless fear of our collective past. In Whispering Hollow, the tale of the Twilight curse lives on, not as a tale of monstrous retribution, but as a poignant chronicle of a people haunted by their history, and ultimately of the triumph of the human spirit over a burden so heavy it threatened to crush them. So if you ever wander into a forgotten village under a blood-red sky, listen carefully to the wind. You might just hear the soft echo of ancient voices, urging you to remember that even in the darkest of curses, hope can flicker like a dying candle, waiting for a brave soul to ignite its flame once more.